Welcome back, Chappelle. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. So this flip isn't too long. But what we're doing today is we're going to continue to talk about the Spanish reach into North and South America, right? Particularly Central America, and also getting into a little bit of discussion about the Spanish extent of their empire and their effects on kind of like the Aztecs and stuff like that. So today we talked heavily about Columbus's effects on like the Taino people, also known as the Arawak people of the Caribbean, and the setting up of that small Spanish colonial empire there. And then we're going to now get outside of that a little bit, right? Because what we're getting into now is, let's go ahead and go over to our map over here. This is an edited one, so let's go ahead and clear that off. So what we're getting in, oh, wait, nope, clear that too. And then I got to go bang, and then I got to go zoom. All right, so where we are right now, if we're looking at this map of North America, right? We're looking at this map of North America. Where we are now in history anyway is we're done now with Columbus, right? So Columbus landed here in the Bahamas, and then he traveled throughout all of these Caribbean islands, and Spain is going to get a major setup point right here on the island of Cuba, right? So now eventually the Spanish are going to start hearing from locals around the area that there is a massive amount of gold in this region of Mexico, right? Controlled by the Aztecs, which if we got a chance to talk about them today in class, I'm really excited about it. If not, we will talk about them as time goes on. But the Aztec, also known as the Mexica Empire of people, was an absolutely massive area. And people from Spain, particularly the governor of the Isle of Cuba at this time, I believe his last name is Diego, he hears that there's a huge amount of gold in this region, right? So a man by the name of Hernan Cortes, who is sitting right down here, was the man sent to Mexico to go and find that gold, right? So he also happens to be one of the biggest tool bags in all of history, right? He is an absolute jerk. If you thought Columbus was mean, just give it a minute, all right? So the biggest thing about Cortes, right? Hernan Cortes, or Hernando Cortes, also referred to as such, got the job literally in one of the most dastardly ways possible. He was originally asked by the governor of Cuba, like, all right, go ahead and go, take a couple ships with you, a few hundred men, 16 horses is all he had, some dogs, and go see if you can explore and get a hold of some modest trade. But Hernan Cortes is greedy, and he starts discussing military outfitting and cannons and guns and how he believes he's going to inhabit natives and also execute them as well along the way. And then the governor's like, well, maybe you're not the best guy for this job, right? And then Hernan Cortes gets fired from the job, and then he appoints a new one instead. The governor of Cuba goes, all right, we'll pick this guy instead. But then the night before they leave, that guy randomly is murdered. So, and then Hernan Cortes hops on the boat and leaves, right? He knows he's now committing a Spanish crime, right? So when he docks in Mexico, he is fully aware that he has to make a major discovery or he'll probably go to prison, right? So what he does, he burns the ships, right? In the harbor, out the natural harbor, off the coast of Mexico. Now that he has landed there successfully, he sets his own ships on fire. And he tells his men, we're returning with wealth, or we're returning in jail. All right, so he sets his boats on fire, and they start to venture out into Mexico, right? And the big thing is they start coming in contact with a lot of these native people, particularly the Maya that live off the coast of what is now Cozumel, if any of y'all have ever been there or heard of it, right? He actually does a lot of his earliest parts of his expedition in Cozumel, right? He comes into contact with some of the Maya, he takes over those individual people, and then he starts meeting people along the way that can speak the languages that he needs to go and communicate with the Aztecs, right? He actually runs into a woman who can speak Maya and Aztec, right? And then he runs into a banished Spanish priest who can speak Spanish and Maya. So he now has two interpreters, right? The Aztec people are going to talk to her, who are then going to translate it into Maya and tell it to him, who's then going to translate it into Spanish and tell it to Cortes, right? So the biggest thing is he goes in there with the intent of conquering and claiming wealth, right? And he heads towards the capital city of Tenochtitlan, which is the Aztec capital that we hopefully got a chance to talk about in class, with its chinampas and street sweepers and effective sewage drainage systems and borderline Roman, you know what I mean? City, very advanced, home to over 1 million people, right? They have tons of different languages spoken there. They have all kinds of economies. They are literally on their way to becoming modern before the Spanish come in and ruin it. All right, but Cortes starts heading towards that capital city, right? Along the way, he starts communicating with people that are under the empire of the Aztec, right? The locals, the natives. And this is where he finds out that the Aztecs have been a very large empire, and underneath their new king, Moctezuma, also known as Montezuma, has controlled the biggest area that the world has ever seen in North America. They have like an empire, right? Montezuma takes a tax on all these people he takes over of innocent people to be sacrificed by having their heart cut out of their chest in a form of a religious ritual. That is the tax. Each village that the Aztecs would take over, they would have to donate people in ceremonies to have their hearts cut out as a religious ceremony for hopefully good harvests, and then also to prevent the destruction of the world, as according to the Aztecs, right? So he finds out that these locals hate the Aztecs, and what's the old saying? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. So what Cortes does is he starts to make alliances with the tribes that the Aztecs have conquered, right? So he showed up with only 500 Spanish men, 16 horses, and some war dogs. He then starts marching to Tenochtitlan with 6,000 native soldiers, right? So they start moving in the direction of the capital, and eventually Moctezuma, the king of the Aztecs, hears that Cortes is approaching, right? And so off the coast, right when he lands in Aztec Empire holdings, he sends gifts. He sends men. He sends people. Moctezuma's like, okay, if we're going to be smart about this, we'll send him a bunch of gold. We'll send him some jaguar pelts, some feathers, some precious stones. We'll send him a bunch of things, hoping that maybe he'll just want to come in and we'll be able to nicely exchange goods with one another, right? And he was like, maybe he'll want to work with us and not, like, kill everybody. Because he is now, by this point, Moctezuma has heard of these people. This is an old myth, and I always keep it in here because you better not be muting me. Welcome to semester 2, right? He heard Cortes was coming. There is an old myth that he thought he might be a god, right? That Moctezuma thought that Cortes might be a pale-skinned god. Moctezuma was fully aware that he was not a god, right? Moctezuma was like, no, he's not a god. He's just a man, right? But these men have been so impactful that the men talking to Moctezuma being like, yeah, there are these white guys that have showed up on the coast, and they ride these insanely big, crazy-looking deer, and they have these sticks that produce lightning, and then they have these beasts that launch rocks that can kill hundreds in an essence, right? He's talking about cannons and guns and horses. The advantages that the Spanish had, right? So Moctezuma hears of this. He's like, oh, crap. There's no way I'm going to be able to avoid this. They're definitely coming. And so that's why he tried to send those gifts, right? He tried to send those gifts hoping that they would, show up with the intention just to trade. But then one of the worst sentences was probably ever uttered. Hernan Cortes asked his interpreter to ask the other interpreter to ask the Aztec people sent by Moctezuma, does he have a lot of gold? Does Moctezuma have a lot of gold? And in the translation, it turned into, how much does he have? And the Aztec people responded with, a huge amount. This then gets Cortes' bloodlust going, and he starts thinking, okay, well, let's go take all of it, right? So Moctezuma, originally, when Cortes shows up, welcomes Cortes into the city, right? The first thing that the Spanish try to do the second they get there is they start trying to convert the Aztecs to Christianity, right? The Aztecs are going to resist. And then what ends up breaking out is a very large battle, right? Because they have Moctezuma as a prisoner. Cortes takes Moctezuma as his prisoner, and he's holding him on a balcony. And he's saying, if y'all don't give over all of your gold and convert to the Christian faith, then we're going to kill your leader. How about that? And then guess what they do? The Aztecs decide to fight this battle instead of actually giving up. And the Aztec people kill their own king, Moctezuma. Apparently there were reports that rocks were thrown from the crowd, and Moctezuma ends up dead, right? And they lose their king, and he dies in that battle. But the Aztecs were able to push them out. The Aztecs were able to actually resist and fight the Spanish completely out of Tenochtitlan, right? Well, the Spanish then go back, and then they get all those natives that they had made allies with and recruit a new army of natives and then come back and destroy the capital of Tenochtitlan, right? And this is made possible mainly because what is killing a lot of the Aztecs without the Spanish even having to lift a finger? The smallpox disease, right? The smallpox virus has killed a huge amount of the Aztecs. The Spanish then come in and they take over the entire city, right? And they begin to take down monuments and destroy statues and also like hold people on trial and court and execute a lot of the Aztecs. And they immediately start setting up gold and silver mines, right? So that's a huge conquest, right? So Spanish, the Cortes takes over the Aztecs, and then this guy comes in. I believe he's a cousin of Cortes, right? His name is Francisco Pizarro, right? Looks like, let me back it up real quick. Looks like, where is he at? I know he's down here. There he is. All right, so this right here, these are your three big guys, right? Columbus, who took, like, basically into the Taino people, or the Arawak people of the Caribbean. That right there is Cortes, and this is Francisco Pizarro, the third Spanish conquistador to be sent by the Spanish Empire, and he heads to Peru, right? He wants to go talk to the Inca and go try and take over those people, right? So he wants to take over the Inca and claim the treasure that they have, right? And here's the crazy part. They have even more gold than the Aztecs do, right? He's also a huge jerk, though. Now, the Inca, though, are really, really struggling because their numbers are drastically low, right? So Pizarro shows up, and he doesn't even realize this, but Pizarro shows up right after the Inca have just got done fighting a civil war with one another, right? They just fought a civil war with one another, and so their numbers are very, very low. And the civil war was actually fought in between Inca versus Inca over this man right here. His name is Atahualpa, right? Atahualpa is their king after the Civil War because his father died, and then him and his brother claimed the throne at the same time. And so they ended up having a civil war over it, right? So a huge civil war is fought, and Atahualpa ends up winning, right? So the Incan numbers are already low. And then Pizarro shows up, and he's like, oh, this is our time. This is our time to strike. We should definitely actually try and get a hold of this entire Incan Empire while their numbers are low after a civil war, right? So what he ends up doing is this very, very famous battle right here. It's called the Battle of Cajamarca, right? So the Battle of, let's go ahead and write it down. We got the Battle of Cajamarca. All right, so the Battle of Cajamarca, right, takes place when King Atahualpa is captured and taken as prisoner, right? And it all happens because of this right up here. King Atahualpa refuses Christianity. So what Pizarro decides to do, because he's not only a genius but also a jerk, he decides to he decides to send word to the Incan king Atahualpa to meet him in a city called Cajamarca, right? And in Cajamarca, there is a huge square, right? And I don't mean like just a big square sitting somewhere. I mean like a park in a sense, right? A very large square. And it's lined with trees and a small wall right here and a small wall right here and then some trees over here and then another area right there. And it's just a big open area, right? And so he sends word to Atahualpa. He's like, look, we can negotiate. We can come here and we can talk to one another and we can figure out how to make this work, right? And so Atahualpa shows up with what little army he still has left after fighting the Civil War. And let's go ahead and describe this army really, really quick. All right, so this army is wearing the best that the Incans have, right? Their weapons are made of rocks. They are wearing cloth armor, right? One of the biggest weapons that the Incans used was they're three rocks. It's like a trebolis, right? It's like three rocks on a string, and they'll like whip it around and they'll throw it, right? Not very advanced when we're talking about fighting Spanish who have cannons, guns, and horses, right? So what Pizarro decides to do, he's like, all right, Atahualpa is going to proceed through here, and we know he's going to bring a lot of people with him. He's going to bring a huge army, right? And the day before they meet, the Spanish actually send recon, and they're like, the Incans brought several thousand people, right? So that means Atahualpa is going to walk through here with several thousand, and the Spanish only have about 100 people with them. That's it. So you're outnumbered 10-1, right? Pizarro, though not being stupid, decides to hide his guys all around the square, right? He hides them, everywhere. He puts cannons on the outside. He puts all this stuff in the trees outside of the square. And here comes Atahualpa proceeding in. And when Atahualpa arrives, he's riding on top of a huge, table, right? He is being carried by his local subjects. He has been carried because they believe that he is an extension of God, right? So Atahualpa, the native king, is being carried into this square on top of a big table with all of his people around him. And what immediately happens as he walks in, he stands right here. A priest is then sent out by Pizarro carrying a Bible, right? He walks up to Atahualpa. He hands Atahualpa the Bible, and he says, "This is the testament of the Lord your God, Jesus Christ, and the Catholic Church. Submit to this and our God before we can communicate with one another." Atahualpa is Incan. He doesn't speak their language. He looks at this book, doesn't know what to do with it, throws it to the ground. The Spanish priest then freaks out, throws up a signal, and every one of the Spanish army jumps the entire group of thousands of the Inca and kills all of them in a very malicious sense. 2 Spanish were wounded, over 1,000 Inca were killed in this entire thing, right? Because they're beginning to fire guns and they're ringing bells and they're setting off huge noises, right? And so the Incan people are scattering, trampling each other, running into swords and horses, and it's a very massive massacre, right? And then Pizarro single-handedly, when he does this, they capture the Incan king Atahualpa, right? They take him as a prisoner, and then they hold him for ransom after this battle, right? That's where you can see right here where they're actually holding him, and they take him as prisoner, right? So they take him as prisoner, they hold him ransom. After this, the Incans actually pay it, right? So the Incans, they're standing in a massive room back in their capital called Cusco, and yes, Emperor's New Groove, Cusco, right? They're standing back in this large, large capital, and he's sitting there, and he's like, "I can fill this room 2 months with double the amount of gold, double the amount of emeralds, and 3 times the amount of silver." And the room is 22 feet by 17 feet. It's humongous, right? And the Incans pay it. And Atahualpa thinks that if he pays this, it'll save his life. But then the Spanish kill him anyway, right? So they make him convert to Catholicism, and then they strangle him to death. And so it's a very, very intense thing. And the effects of all this Spanish conquest, so now the Aztecs are gone, the Inca are done with. The Spanish are going to immediately set up gold and silver mines, and they're going to use their new wealth to become Europe's richest and strongest power, right? So the native populations have no choice but to give in, convert, or die, right? And that's it. So we talked about Cortes and Pizarro today. I'll see you guys later. Y'all have a good one.